In the comments of my XG270QG review, Paigu said, "Do a CRT review." Okay. In all my previous monitor reviews, I've leaned heavily into comparisons with a CRT. I'd like to think I'm not just an old man desperately clinging to my very heavy CRT for nostalgia alone. There's a lot that we've lost in the transition to LCD as the dominant display technology. So today I want to review a Dell P1130 CRT from 2003. Actually, two Dell CRTs. Or maybe just describe what it's like to use a CRT in the year 2020. CRTs are definitely not perfect, but I hope after this video you'll see why I've been so critical of the LCDs that I've reviewed. But let's start with my twin 21-inch Dells, which are actually just Sony Trinitrons in disguise. The P1130 was marketed as a 21-inch screen, but the actual image diagonal is just under 20 inches. At the time these were sold, around 2000, the big selling points of CRTs were flat screens, max addressable resolution, and pixel pitch. Dell at the time said the P1130 did 2048 by 1536 at 80 Hz with a 0.24mm dot pitch. I wanted one of these so bad way back then, but as you saw in the last video, I only had the 17-inch ViewSonic PF795. To actually find a CRT for sale now, especially after that Digital Foundry video, you're going to have to get lucky on Craigslist. But I got these two CRTs years ago. You could say that I'm a bit of a CRT hipster. I was into CRTs before they were cool. And crazily, I was actually using a CRT as my primary display up until 2015. The one on the right, the 2003 model, I got for free. Someone just wanted to get rid of it. The other, the 2002, I got for $20 from a machine shop that was upgrading their displays. I don't normally run these side by side, the magnetic fields interfere with each other, but I keep one in storage as a spare. I need these to last until something definitively better comes along. But why even use a CRT? There are, I think, 4 primary advantages CRTs have over LCDs. CRTs have no processing lag. They have incredible black levels, beaten only by OLED. CRTs also have no real negative resolution, so they are highly adaptable to displaying a variety of content. And lastly, but I think most importantly, their motion clarity is unmatched. Before I start covering those topics though, I should start with how to even use a CRT with a modern graphics card. The last greatest card to include native analog out is the Maxwell Titan X, but a 980 Ti works just fine. You'll want to look for a DVI-I connector that has the 4 analog pins around the cross. The digital to analog converter on these cards can do 400 MHz, which is necessary for high resolutions and refresh rates. If you have a more modern card, watch out for cheap HDMI DisplayPort to VGA adapters. They were designed primarily for 1920 by 1080 at 60 Hz, so even when pushed, they can't max out a good CRT. There are solutions using USB-C adapters, but if you're really interested, check out the Sony FW900 thread on Hardforum, which has been going continuously since 2005. I understand why NVIDIA and AMD dropped analog out, but it's making things a bit harder for us. The first advantage I mentioned earlier was input lag. CRTs are analog devices, so nothing is cached or buffered. As soon as the video card's DAC spits out a signal, the CRT's electron gun is painting its beam across the phosphor surface. I'll talk about that in more detail later. There's been a mystique in the fighting game community about CRTs, where they've been coveted for their low latency. It is true that some TVs have abysmal lag, but I have some good news for us. Modern LCD gaming monitors are now fast enough that the processing lag doesn't really matter. My input lag measurements are done the same way for all the monitors I test. I have a microcontroller send a USB key press to a custom Unreal Engine game running at 1000 FPS, and I time how long it takes for the screen to change color. But to make sure I capture the best possible response, I have to take a lot of measurements, 1020. That's what my waterfall plots are showing. But let's take a look at a comparison of the input lag results from every monitor I've tested so far. I've, on purpose, extended the horizontal axis out to 16 milliseconds, just to show how good most of these monitors are. The slowest monitor on this chart, the ViewSonic, has less than 1 millisecond of lag. I say it'd be impossible to notice that. Now to be clear, these results don't account for LCD transition times, just processing delay. CRTs are amazing, but I'm happy that modern displays are doing great here. The second CRT attribute I want to talk about is the incredibly dark black levels, something we've definitely lost with LCDs. OLEDs are even better than CRTs here, but with a properly calibrated CRT, you can get pretty close. Speaking of that calibration, If you do purchase a CRT, there's going to be a lot of work involved in getting black to look actually black. I'm again going to mention Hardforum, because spacediver has a great guide on how to calibrate Sony CRTs to get the most out of them. It takes some time, but the results are worth it. There's one caveat I want to mention about this amazing black level. It only works in the dark. CRTs generally have poor rejection of external light. The brighter the environment, the worse they look. It's an inescapable CRT characteristic. Tons of engineering work has been put into modern TVs to make them look black, even in super bright showrooms. I'm shining a flashlight at this Samsung VA TV. Where'd all the light go? The Asus VG27AQ is not a Samsung TV. Check out that anti-glare coating compared to the CRT's glass surface. Yikes. Anyway, the Asus is a well-performing IPS display with a contrast ratio of around 1100 to 1. I covered this type of comparison a bit in my review of the VG27AQ, but it's worth going over again. Let's start with the lights on. Both monitors are on and displaying black. Neither looks amazing, but with the lights off and the camera exposure cranked, there's really no comparison. Yes, the CRT is on. If you've been paying close attention, you may have noticed that I haven't used the word contrast when talking about CRTs. Black levels, yes, but not contrast. So let's now come to the CRT's worst nightmare, the ANSI checkerboard contrast test. CRTs suffer from halos around bright objects, and a pure black, pure white checkerboard illustrates this nicely. I measured an ANSI contrast ratio of only 260 to 1. It's bad. The Asus here maintains its typical 1100 to 1 contrast no matter what is being displayed. This is one area where the LCD wins. But how often does real content look like a checkerboard pattern? One of my favorite tests for contrast is this image of the ISS. It's not as bad as the checkerboard, but it should show any of the CRT's shortcomings. This shot is purposely overexposed to see what's going on in the dark areas of the image. You can definitely see haloing around the bright parts, but the CRT still gets dark in the center. The Asus does well, but it has an overall elevated black level. An OLED would embarrass both. When I said earlier that CRTs have no real native resolution, that's not entirely true. They do have a fixed pixel pitch. This old CRT, for example, has a slot mask separating out the RGB phosphors, but the electron beam can be painted across the screen at any particular resolution. One single pixel output from the NES for The Legend of Zelda can take up 3 or 4 physical pixels on the screen, and this will vary even from pixel to pixel. At low resolutions, this analog painting of pixels gives CRTs great adaptability when it comes to displaying a wide range of resolutions. But let's get back to the CRT I'm actually reviewing, the Dell P1130. Modern Trinitrons use an aperture grill instead of a slot or shadow mask, meaning they have a continuous vertical stripe for each RGB phosphor. But importantly, they have a much finer dot pitch. The macro shots we're looking at now all have the exact same magnification, so it gives a comparison of the dot pitch of the old RCA TV, the Dell CRT, and a modern 40-inch 4K screen. The Dell's 0.24mm dot pitch is actually quite good. With the help of that finer dot pitch, let's look at The Legend of Zelda, but now on the P1130. Keeping BizHawk at a 1x magnification, Zelda is only showing up in a tiny window, 256 by 224. That's an 8:7 aspect ratio rather than 4:3, like both CRTs. Playing this pixel perfect on an LCD doesn't show the true squatter image you'd get on a CRT. This is where the benefits of a CRT come in. We can make a custom 8:7 resolution and stretch it to 4:3 with the OSD geometry controls. One thing we can't do though is run the screen at 256 by 224. That's just too low for the Dell. We need to double the resolution in both directions, which is going to be 512 by 448. In the NVIDIA control panel, we need to add a custom resolution, and we're going to change the width to 512, the height to 448, and the refresh rate to 60. Choose GTF timing, but notice that the horizontal refresh rate is now below 30 kHz, which the monitor can't do. We can fix that by adding to the vertical total up to 500. That puts us at 30 kHz exactly. And we can test and apply. Do we want to keep this resolution? Yes. Ooh, look at those scan lines. So how does it look? Well, not at all like the old RCA. The NES 101 top loader's composite output is just wretched, but these super crisp scan lines don't look anything like I remember as a kid. I don't know about you, but I didn't have a Sony BVM in my house as a kid, but I can see why those things are going for crazy prices on eBay. It looks amazing. Compared against the RCA, especially with the fuzzy and wiggly NES composite out, I can't see why you'd want to go back to the original experience. The CRT monitor beats the CRT television. You can also get proper 640 by 480 VGA output from a Dreamcast. But the P1130 can do higher resolutions as well. I typically run the screen at 1340 by 1005 at 120 Hz. That may seem like an odd resolution, but that resolution and refresh rate combined puts the horizontal signal frequency at 130 kHz, which is the max the Dell can accept. For CRTs, there's always the trade-off of refresh rate for resolution. Going to 1600 by 1200, the refresh rate has to drop to 102 Hz. At 1920 by 1440, it drops again to 86 Hz. Another resolution that I use often is 2496 by 1872 at 60 Hz. This one butts up against a different limit, the 980 Ti's 400 MHz pixel clock. I can't push the CRT any higher than this. That resolution seems high for a CRT. Can the Dell actually display 2496 by 1872? Short answer, not really. But let's put that to the test. This first macro image of my 4K Samsung shows the test pattern I'm going to use at various resolutions on the CRT. The LCD shows it pixel perfect. The first CRT shot is at 640 by 480. At this low resolution, each pixel is taking up essentially 3 horizontal phosphor stripes. But you can see on the red pixels that 4 stripes are being illuminated. This will always happen. You could try to find some perfect resolution and screen geometry that would fill the stripes evenly, but that would only work on one portion of the screen. Another thing to note is that the horizontal traces for red, green, and blue aren't perfectly aligned. Red is lower than green and blue. Convergence is another thing to worry about with CRTs, and you'll most likely never get it perfect. If you have the patience, you can find a convergence guide also on Hardforum. 800 by 600 still shows this pattern quite clearly, and it gives another demonstration of how the electron beam is painting different phosphor stripes. At 1280 by 960, this macro shot may lead you to think this looks pretty bad, but to the eye, each pixel and line are still distinct. On the red pattern, the first vertical line is hitting 2 stripes. The second is mostly hitting only 1, but because the single stripe is the same brightness as the first 2 together, your eyes still see the correct pixel image. The same thing happens with the green phosphors. 1600 by 1200 is pushing it. There's still some delineation between shapes, but everything is kind of running together at this point. 1920 by 1440, and especially 2496 by 1872, show no real detail. But there is a reason why you'd use these higher resolutions. Consider this a form of analog supersampling. I think games look incredible on the Dell at 2496 by 1872. It's definitely not as crisp as a modern QHD LCD, but the P1130 gives a smooth and analog look that's really appealing. I'm a sucker for open-world driving games, so even though The Crew 2 is in many ways a worse game than the first The Crew, I do like driving around a squashed USA. And the game looks fantastic at 2496 by 1872. But one of the biggest problems with The Crew 2 is that the game is limited to 60 Hz, which is ridiculous for something that came out in the middle of 2018. But The Crew is not alone. 60 FPS caps are everywhere. This is a big problem for LCDs because all LCDs by design suffer from sample and hold blurring, unless of course they have a backlight strobing mode, something I've talked about at length in my other reviews. But what I also complained about in those reviews is that monitor manufacturers refuse to allow users access to backlight strobing at 60 Hz. I suspect they're trying to stave off complaints about headaches, but here's a Samsung TV strobing at 60 Hz. If Samsung can put it on a TV meant for regular people, the monitor guys can do it as well. Tons of games would benefit from 60 Hz strobing, and not just modern stuff. To get proper blur-free motion in older emulated games, it's essential to strobe at 60 Hz, much like a CRT. But that brings us back nicely to the last item on my list of CRT advantages, incredible motion clarity. To really see why CRTs are so good at this, we need to look at how the electron beam is traced across the screen. This video shows approximately how the electron beam traces across and then down the screen. As soon as the electrons hit the phosphor layer, the phosphors emit a very brief but very bright burst of photons. For the rest of the frame, though, the screen is dark. When you're tracking an object, say Sonic the Hedgehog, with your eyes, this dark period allows your eyes to track to the next frame without the image smearing across your retina. This is what the backlight strobing modes on LCDs are trying to emulate. This slide shows the light response of a CRT refreshing at 120 Hz and 8.3 millisecond frame time. Look at how brief the strobes are. The brightness drops 80% in the first 0.5 milliseconds. The VSonic XG270QG allows you to adjust the pulse width down to something comparable, but ULMB on that monitor was compromised by other problems. But back to the Crew 2. Strobing helps motion clarity in all games, but it makes a huge difference in racing games. On an LCD, it's nearly impossible to read signs or brake markers as you drive past them. On a CRT, it's no problem. Check out these pursuit videos of the Crew 2. This speed limit 50 sign would just be a blur on an LCD. Or watch the names of the shops as I zoom past. Since it's a bit too difficult to take pursuit photos of an open-world driving game, here's a comparison of the Blurbuster Alien. The LCD is the VG27AQ at 60 Hz, and I don't mean to pick on it in particular. Any sample and hold screen, even OLEDs, have around this much blur at 60 Hz. There's no getting around this without strobing. Okay, I've been praising CRTs for a while now, but there are downsides I want to briefly mention. Other than being big, heavy, and hot, CRTs are surprisingly noisy. They emit a constant high-pitched squeal, and that gets worse the higher you push the refresh rate. That's the main reason I stopped using the Dell as my main display back in 2015. They also don't get very bright. My 2003 model tops out at 112 nits, which is darker than the VG27AQ at its minimum brightness level. And as I previously mentioned, they aren't razor sharp, so you shouldn't be using one for text. Save the CRT for special occasions. I love CRTs, and I hope this video has shown you why I love them. If you can find one in good condition for sale at a reasonable price, I'd jump at the chance. But if you can't, or they seem like too much work, 20-year-old CRTs can at least show us something that we've lost since the transition to LCD. And they can give us a guide to where advancements in 2020 display technology are needed most. Thanks for watching.